Grief is such an overpowering emotion, especially after losing someone so close to you. It can take months, years, even decades to get back to normal, if that's even possible after experiencing a significant loss. This podcast was created to help you move through and release the emotions, allowing you to heal the hurt and begin living again. Listen in as I chat with medical professionals, grief workers, and people who have first-hand experience in losing a loved one, what their experience has been, and what they did to help heal themselves and those around them. Life isn't always sunshine and rainbows, but I believe there is always a silver lining if you're willing to look. Welcome to the Release Podcast. Welcome to another episode of Release Grief Podcast. Today I am here with Diana Alt. Did I say it right? Did I get it? Oh, yay! I'm so excited. You don't know how many times I went to pronounce people's names and they are not phonetically like how I pronounce them.
Right.
And so then I feel like an idiot and I forgot to ask you the correct pronunciation of your name before we went live. So I'm hoping, I'm winging it here. Like
It's like the princess. That's how I get people, because I get Dana, Deanne, Dina, Dinah,
yeah.
everything. Stuff I don't even know how'd you get Donna? You know? So when I tell them it's like the princess or the Michael Jackson song, I rather use the princess one than people
Right.
really don't forget. So if I'm
Oh, I love
feeling
it.
particularly salty, I say it's like the dead princess, and then no one ever forgets. So
Right. I don't know how they would. Yeah.
20 years old and have no idea what I'm talking about. So
Well, there is that too. I mean, that
there's
was a whole other era ago.
that. That's been a minute since that all went down. So
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. As you know, as all my listeners know, this is all about grief. So, and I was sharing with Diana earlier about how it amazes me that people still sign up to share their grief on this podcast, or share their grief in general, just with anyone. But I'm really thankful that people find it, kind of calming, relaxing, and helpful to hear other people's stories.
I'm actually not surprised that people sign up to tell
Mm.
their story, because the the reason, like I told you right before you hit record, like I think what you're doing is incredibly important. And the reason I think that is because in general, especially the Western world, is so uncomfortable with death, is so uncomfortable with trauma, unless you're trying to be like trendy and talking about trauma, which is equally gross. And so people that are experiencing grief don't want to talk about it except for to a very few safe people, because everyone is awkward.
Yeah,
They can't
I agree
just
with that.
sit there and be like, I can't relate, but I feel for you. So
Hmm.
I think the fact that someone holds space for 45 minutes for someone to tell a story is a big deal.
It is a big deal. It's a very big deal. And I'm glad they trust me with their story enough to
Yeah.
to come on my podcast.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, you're doing something right, clearly.
Well, thank you. And with all of that being said, I mean, wait,
What a
stop.
great
Shower
intro.
me with more. No, I'm just kidding.
We just showered you with praise for what you're doing, which I ever since I saw you, like we met in a Facebook group when you were looking for podcast guests, which I thought was I like tripping across people, because I feel like it's, oh, that day, that's a good match. That day I found that person. But yeah, it's people don't talk about this stuff enough. And a lot people just, there's a certain amount of bravery, but I don't know, is it braver to tell the story, or is it braver to like walk through life just experiencing it? I think this storytelling for me is the easy part. So,
Yeah.
because I
Well,
do
that
that
being
for 45
said,
minutes and then I'm done.
yeah,
No.
right?
Yeah, go on. I'm gonna pay the bills after we're done here and eat some lunch. So
I
that's
love
pretty.
that. That's
When
awesome.
did you start the podcast?
I felt this universal calling that people needed to share stories about grief. I
Wow.
literally felt it. That was the only reason why I started.
Wow. So it's not born of like, is it related to you also experiencing grief, or was it just
Well,
dropped?
yeah, I did experience a lot of grief, but I just felt that others needed to tell their story. That I was just getting this collective vibe that people had so much to share and
Yeah,
they weren't given a platform and to share it.
yeah,
And so I started it.
cool. Well, I love it. And I'm sitting here thinking, oh, she's looking for guests. Like I can think of people that definitely are willing to tell their stories. So
Yeah, send them my way.
right,
I'm
you
always
you
looking
might be
for them.
surprised by that, but I'm not. So
Okay. Well, perfect. I'm always game. I love this is so my this podcast for me is how I like to connect with people, like one on one. It's very down to earth. It's just a conversation. Um, and I'm always like inside. You don't see it, but I'm always like, I'm so at attention. I'm like, oh, tell me more. I want to know. I just want to know all the things.
yeah, cool. Well, how do we start this? So far, we've talked about the podcast. What are we doing next?
What are we doing next? Now we're gonna get down into the nitty gritty.
Now we're gonna do it.
Now we're gonna do it.
I'm sure the people listening to this episode are like, what are these women doing? What is happening here? So,
Well, you know what? I'm a firm believer that grief is not always about sadness and loss. Grief can
no.
be about, if you choose it to be, happiness and healthiness and laughter and fun and all of the things. It doesn't have to be this depressing ass fucking storybook that we've all been told our entire fucking lives. And
Uh,
no one, and this is the reason why people don't want to share is because it's like, no, you have to act a certain way. I don't like that. So,
I don't
that
either.
being
I think
said,
it's gross.
it
So,
is gross. Tell me all the things, Diana. Tell me.
well, okay. So I like my story that I told you, whenever we made arrangements for this, I was gonna talk some about is I was 34 years old when I lost my husband that I'd only
Hmm.
been married to for 2.5 years. And it's been 15 years ago. And you can ask all the questions, we can talk about that. But where it gets gross for me is that I have not remarried. And people are like, oh, you loved him so much. And I'm like, no, I mean, like, yeah, he was my person, but also, have you been on Bumble? Like,
I have not. I gotta clarify.
have you
I've
have
never
you
been on
right.
any dating
But
app. I
when
gotta
people
clarify.
say that, like they'll there's people that'll be like, "Oh, she's so like still in love with her husband." And I'm like, "He's a cool dude. Like really glad I married him. I married well." But when you think about dating in your late 40s or like from mid 30s to 40, it sucks at any age, really.
Yeah.
Let's be real. But I'm like, "Have you been on Hinge lately? Have you tried to have your friends set you up? Like it's not easy. It's not easy.
No, but I want to see a
It's really
site called
hard.
Unhinged. Maybe I don't
That
want to see it.
would
I'm
be
just
amazing.
kidding. I'm just kidding. I don't want to see it.
Uh, in that someone should make a sitcom about it way, it would be fun. Like
Right.
like
Right.
that would be fantastic. Or a romantic comedy called Unhinged, and it's oh gosh, there's so much potential.
Yes.
Seriously, like people say the stupidest shit, and it starts very early. Like it'll start when you find out that there's a diagnosis or if the death is sudden and or people didn't know that the person was sick. It will start like at the funeral or right after they hear that your person died. And it never stops. It does slow down,
Hmm.
but it never stops. But people aren't used to a young widow. They have no idea what to do with that.
No. No. I
No
could
clue.
see that.
No clue whatsoever. So Um, and I made my husband, he and I met at work, which is it's the adult equivalent of meeting your spouse in college, I guess. But he and I worked together and were good friends for a couple of years. And then we were at a pretty large company here in Kansas City, and he decided to transfer to a different department, which I found out shortly after is because he wanted to date me. And I was a first off an idiot. Like I didn't see it. I have no mojo. But he also was like, I don't want to be in the same department as you if it works out that we start dating. So we started dating after he transferred departments. And it was obvious to everyone except me that that was supposed to happen.
I love that.
Yeah, like, "Oh, fine, it's about damn time," is kinda what the reaction from a lot of our
From
mutual friends
everyone.
was. They're like, "Oh, well, finally.
Welcome, Diana. Welcome to your
Welcome.
life.
Welcome to your life." Exactly. My best friend who lived in a different state but would come and visit me had met, several of my work friends because I just invited her to lunch with us one day when she was visiting, and at the end of it, she's like, "That guy on the end, Andy, tell what's his story?" Because he's real smart. Like, what's going on there? And I was like, nothing, he's my friend. And she's like, right. And then when I told her that we were dating, like, which was like probably almost a year later, she was like, not surprised. And when we talked about it, she said, you're either going to break up with him or know that you're marrying him within 30 days. Like that was the I can't even
Oh, wow.
remember who said it. She or I. She literally called me 30 days later and was like, "Which is it?" And I was like, "Well, we got married 2 years. We got engaged 2 years later, married 3 years later." And then he ended up getting a brain tumor that was pretty
Oh,
aggressive. And he never even started treatment for it. It's like headaches, dizziness. It's brain tumors start very weirdly. Like
they do. It's almost
all
like they
kinds of
come out of
ways
the
that they
blue.
can start. Yeah, there's all kinds of ways that they can start, but basically he had had, headaches, dizziness, but also had a stressful job and like some other like health shenanigans he was trying to wrangle. And then to make a very long story very short, he found out he had surgery to figure out what the weird thing on the CAT scan was. Um, got a diagnosis, and then he died like 18 days after we found out what the diagnosis was.
Oh, wow.
Because, whenever you find out that you have cancer, if basically if someone's in the hospital, particularly because he was after this surgery, the whole world mobilizes. Like you go from like status quo, like whatever was happening with doctors, like your main doctor and nurse, to all of a sudden like you've got a radiology guy and a chemo guy and a this guy and a that guy all trying to figure out what you're gonna do about this weird ass thing growing inside your brain so we could maybe get rid of that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a blur the whole time, but he ended up having a seizure
Mm.
and dying right before we were gonna start stuff for treatment.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So,
That's
and then
wild.
yeah, it was wild. And another thing that was wild is I had started a new job less than 2 months before. So there was not FMLA. I have all these new people, and my company was wonderful. They basically said, do what you have to do. At the time, the company didn't really issue laptops to anybody but like salespeople and consultants that were regularly on the road. So they set me up to work remotely while I'm hanging out in the hospital with my husband. Um, but yeah, it was very strange to try to go through all of that 2 months into a new job.
Yeah.
So really weird, but it was good. And I'm kind of blessed that it happened that way because the job I had right before that was toxic as fuck. It was horrible. And my husband had just given notice to a job that he didn't like right before he ended up having the raging, screaming headache that led to the hospital that he never
Mm.
really came home from. So we both had spent most of our marriage in this terrible, like kind of shitty work situation where we're smart, we're good, we're hardworking, but there's a lot of dysfunction around us. I dealt with legitimate bullying in the form of, like everything that you can think of: bullying, backbiting, lying about me, information withholding, like all this kind of nonsense. And I was doing the work of about one and a half people with 11 direct reports or something like that. It was pretty
Mhm.
gnarly. So yeah, it was a lot. But I'm lucky I got out because I don't know what I would have done if I was at the shitty job. Like, would you have been good to me? Would you have been a jerk to me? Would you have used the fact that I'm in and out as an excuse to fire me? Like, what would you have done? So,
Right.
yeah, it was the best thing ever to not be
So,
in a situation, to be in a supportive environment.
so with his brain tumor, had they how long had he had it? Did it just pop up out of the blue, or do they know anything
Not
about it?
really
Or
anyone know about that. The kind that he had was pretty fast growing and pretty aggressive. It's called medulloblastoma, and it sat on his cerebellum. And the wildest part about it is that it's usually a tumor that's found in little kids. Like the
Hmm,
biggest, he was 40, and the biggest group of people that get this tumor are kids under the age of like 5 or 6. So that was one of those where they did a surgery, they took out as much as they could, sent it to pathology, and like the local people are like, that can't be right. We're gonna send it to Sloan Kettering or wherever they sent it to for a second opinion. And they said, yep, that's right. And after he died, I found out that the prognosis was like terrible.
really?
Yeah, it was he had other he had other health complications um that would have made treatment just be a pain in the butt. Like we had some gymnastics we were trying to deal with because he had a pacemaker because he had had
Okay.
heart damage from like whatever cardio, what do you call it, blood clot in his lung. He'd had a blood clot in his
Oh,
lung
wow.
before, and they found out he had cardiomyopathy, and so he had a pacemaker. And you have to like you stage radiation using MRI. Like
Yeah.
it's not super compatible with a pacemaker. So
No.
we were planning this whole thing where we were going to take his pacemaker out for just long enough to stage his chemo and then put it back in.
Are
And
those surgically in and out
yeah,
pacemakers? Yeah,
yeah.
that's what I was thinking. I'm
But it
like,
was not
that's
super, I mean, like, it was not terribly invasive. And it was one of those times when you think in the healthcare system, like, we talk a lot about just how dysfunctional it is. And you can barely get doctors in the same hospital to talk to each other. But we
hmm.
had people from two different health systems because the person that put in his pacemaker was from KU Health System. And then he was in Olathe Health System, which is all in the Kansas City area. They've actually since merged. They merged a couple of years ago. But we had, these people doing conference calls to try to figure out how to take care of this guy because everybody liked him. And they're like 40 years old, married 2 years. Like
Yeah.
this is worth getting creative.
Yeah,
Um, in the
that
midst
makes
of all
sense.
this, like you talk about how grief can be about funny and joy and not just
Yeah.
depressed sad stuff. So, um, we're in the hospital after he has surgery, found out his diagnosis, trying to build like all the plan out. At the time, he couldn't walk because he'd been in ICU for days and he just needed PT to like get around.
Hmm.
So the the main two chemo doc or cancer doctors would come in and say, okay, guys, here's what's happening. And I'll never forget that they told us you're a complex medical case, and 2 or 3 times a week this group of doctors would meet and brainstorm about complex medical cases, which we then started calling tumor club. And then we would like make all the fight club jokes, like the first rule of tumor club is not to talk about tumor club. So
And
that's
this
me,
is you and your husband
me
talking
and my
about this.
husband. This is me and my husband. And the doctor's like, are you okay? And then he just rolls with it because, you always have to take a minute and go, are these people really joking around? Are
Right.
they very upset? Are they just trying to find good in it? Like, what is the deal? Can I play along with this? Like, do I get to jump in on this crazy
Right.
or not? And we're like, yeah, come on in. Let's be silly together. Because if you don't laugh at life, you're just going to be curled up in a corner in the fetal position because you can't, everything feels bad if you don't make a point of trying to find good in it.
I love that's perfectly said
Yeah.
because it's it can be overwhelming if you don't, you know,
Yeah. It really,
partner it with laughter and
yeah. Yeah. So, but there's a lot of decisions that you have to make along the way in life. So we decided that we were going to try to have fun with the doctors, while we were trying to figure out what's the plan here. Um, And then but like fast forward, he had gone into a PT hospital that was nearby. I actually was able to work while he was there because the PTs are like, he's busy and then he's going to be tired.
Hmm.
So the place that he was at was maybe 10 minutes from my office, so I could go up there after work or on lunch or whatever. But he actually just one morning, one Sunday morning, I went to see him. I had seen him every single day that he was in the hospital this whole time. A lot of days just hanging out. Some days when he was like in PT mode, I would just go for 30 minutes and then go home after work or whatever. But there was this one day I didn't want to go. I was just tired. I'm like been burning the midnight oil, like trying to balance work and managing complex care and managing the in-laws and my own like the people that there's people that'll make it about them when it's about them, some of that kind of stuff. And then I almost didn't go in on a Sunday and I said, "You know what? I'm gonna go, even just for a little while." I remember driving in and thinking the leaves were beautiful because it was in October. I got there, I talked to him for like 5 minutes, and then he's like, "I don't really feel good today." Like, next thing that's happening is he's in a seizure.
Oh no.
And he basically, like, cardiac arrest, seizure, whole 9 yards. They took him to the hospital. Like, I was in the ER when we had to say, like, we need to stop doing CPR.
Oh,
So, yeah, doing that in front of your mother in law and father-in-law, like we need to stop. And his dad's asking, why are you stopping? Because like it's just chaotic environment.
yeah.
Weird ass day. Um, so right after that is the most important decision I've made in my life. So when your husband dies after coding, they take you to the little room in the hospital where they want the people to be after their person dies. So they're not, they can
In the
have some
room. Yeah.
privacy, they're not upsetting other people, like all of that. And there were people in and out, but I had this moment shortly after that I was alone because my in-laws had, I think they'd gone home to call people or something like that. And
Hmm.
I had called a friend to ask her to come up, but she wasn't there yet. And I remember just sitting down on the ground and I decided I was going to have an awesome life. I had no fucking clue how I was going to do that. But I made a decision within I think it was less than 2 hours for sure. Maybe even less than an hour after my husband died in front of me that I was going to have an awesome life. And that is honestly, there are times when that is the only thing that has kept me going,
Yeah.
is that decision. So yeah, deciding stuff is important.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always important.
Yeah,
I mean, everything in your life, in your world is a decision that you made
yeah.
prior.
Or a decision
Everything
that
that
you
you
punted.
get,
Awful lot of your life is a decision that you punted too.
that too. Because even the decisions that you don't make are decisions,
Yeah,
I mean, if you just
sure.
let things go, it's still a decision.
Yes.
Um,
I weirdly like losing your person is weirdly terrible, but I've watched a lot of my friends get divorced up to that point and since then.
mhm.
And I think I'd rather be where I'm at than going through my best friend's divorce from her narcissistic ex-husband. Like I'll take what I've got. There's a statement I heard made that I relate to a lot is like, I think if you got a group of people together and said you can put all your problems in the middle of the floor and then go pick out what problems you want. You got to have some problems.
Mhm.
We're going to let you start from scratch those. So we have all the problems in the middle of the floor. Go pick your problems. Like I think the smart people just go pick the same problems that they have dealt with because you don't know what it's like to deal with. I don't know what your biggest problem is. I don't know that I want to know. Like, I don't want to wear it around.
Right. I don't want to have to figure it out. That's the
Yeah.
thing. I don't
Like,
have to figure out how to do it.
yeah. I'm like, you know how to do that. Like, I would rather help you figure out how to do your own problem and you help me figure out how to do my problem, but I don't want to switch problems with you from
No,
the start.
that's a lot of
So,
work. To me,
yeah.
that sounds like a headache.
Yeah. I don't think I want to do that. So, anyway, but yeah, that's all that's a long time ago. I didn't know what story I was going to tell you, but that's what came out. But honestly, that whole situation changed so many things. Um, I had the added extra fun that like 8 or 9 months after my husband died, my dad died.
Mm,
And my dad hadn't been in good health for a number of years, but that's still a shock. He had cardiovascular disease and diabetes and was over 70 and all of that. But that was not super fun to stack on top of each other. But again, I had a good husband. I knew exactly where I stood with him. I had a good marriage. I had a good dad. I knew exactly where I stood with him. It was not a surprise that he passed because he was not in good health. I saw him the day he died because I'm in Kansas City. He lived in St. Louis. He died on 4th of July. I had been in town that weekend, but
mhm,
also I went home that afternoon, or I would have been with him when he had a heart attack at the family 4th of July party. So that was like the universe protecting me from something. But yeah, that's kind of, I went through all of that in less than a year. And I tell you, I'm a Midwestern girl raised by teachers. I'm
mhm,
also an Enneagram 8, so I'm a salty bitch that cannot be controlled. But I grew up with people who highly valued the rules and doing their duty and being good in the community. And um, as a person that was, parents were both in academics and they both grew up on farms, like there's a lot of that salt of the earth, you work hard kind of
mhm.
thing going on in my life. And there's also a lot of, you want to meet your parents' expectations. And even when you are a salty bitch, you cannot be controlled. You still want your parents' approval
Right.
more than I realized. And there's nothing like being widowed first, like nobody knows what I'm going through. That was kind of liberating. That's like, you can't tell me how to do, like, you can tell me how to do college. You can tell me, there's a lot of stuff you can tell me, your guidance on how to be successful. You have no fucking clue how to do this.
Yeah.
So it was liberating because my parents were supportive, but I they I had to go figure out other ways to manage things. So which was strange, but like I said, also liberating.
So,
Um
so question. What were some of those, how you like made it through both of those griefs stacked on top of each other? Like from your husband, like I'm guessing you were doing something
um,
to help with the
I
grief and stuff.
weirdly I did not get any therapy for like 2 years
Mm.
because um so much of what I knew, I had never been to any therapist at all, so that was part of it. But also, like, I would check out like online communities for people that were widowed. Like, I found a couple that were related to being widowed young or cancer, widows, whatever. And all the people were like sad sacks. Like, I didn't like, and I don't mean to dismiss anybody, but like, there were people that are like, my life is over. I'm like, you're
Mhm.
32. So, I just felt like there I wanted to be a person that was processing grief and going through it, but I didn't want to be marinating in it all the
Yeah.
time in a negative way. So I focused a lot on my people that were really my people, which was a combination of like my best friend, who she lived far away, but she was a really good support system. We've been best
Hmm.
friends 7. My parents were good until my dad died. I've always been pretty independent. So, I'm not the person that was like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do the bills and how do I get oil
Right.
changed and what do I do? It's like, well, I was either already doing it or I was going to write checks for it anyway because I don't fix anything but dinner. So,
Right.
I feel like I was functional. I was 34 when I got married, so I had been functioning as an adult for a very long time.
Right.
About 2 years later, I was really struggling with depression and grief because you're numb for a while. Like
Yeah.
that's a real
Yep.
thing. And I ended up going to therapy. And the woman that I went to therapy for, I walked in saying it was about grief. And she said, "You have major depression, and we can't actually deal with grief until we deal with that."
Mm,
Which is interesting because a lot of people would think, well, you're depressed because your husband died. And she's
right.
like, no, like you've probably had depression for years after
Mm.
history. She's like, you got to deal with that. And then you can start dealing with the grief side of it.
Oh, wow.
Um, and she told me, she and a couple other people told me I was one of the most functional young widows they'd ever seen, which is not necessarily good. Like hyper independent,
No.
not awesome. But they're like, you're not in a puddle in the middle of the floor. You're not in a crisis situation, but you do need to deal with stuff. So I was in therapy for with that person for, I don't know, like 8 or 9 months. It was definitely helpful. Um, and then I stopped, and then I wanted to go back to her, but she had changed her practice to only work with children. So I
Mm,
couldn't get her. I got referred to somebody else that was terrible. And I didn't really know about trying out therapists, so I just said fuck it for years on therapy
yeah.
and tried to be. But I've always been into personal development. Like
Right.
I read all the books and listen to all the podcasts and do all the things. And I also had workaholic tendencies and I like to work. I was raised by farmers and teachers and I had a career that I mostly liked. Sometimes I didn't like the place I was working, but I liked what I was doing with my career. So I did a lot of work, but it changed the trajectory of my work and what the
Mm,
place work held in my life. So at the time, a few months or even just a few months before Andy died, I probably would have told you that I was going to try to go up the ladder. I was in IT. I had done work in like project management and business analysis and like software testing, like all that kind of stuff to make software happen. And I thought I was going to try to be, I was a manager at the time. I thought I was going to try to be a director and on and on and on. And
mhm.
my path went from being to try to go up to my objective was I just want to make cool shit with cool people.
Yeah.
That's what I cared about. And I wanted to be challenged and I wanted, I don't, if we're doing the same thing, like you don't get to be a senior product manager while I'm a product manager, like there's gonna be words said about that. I wanted fairness. I wasn't being passive in my career, but the goal became very different.
Hmm.
And I had always helped people with things related because my work now, I'm not in IT anymore, but I'm a career and executive coach and I work with people in IT.
Okay.
So my ethos is work should feel good. I've
Yeah.
actually just was in like on a business coaching call with a group of people talking about like, should I actually change my business name to that? Because that's the ethos. Because I've always helped people with search. I'm almost 50, so I started my career in tech like 2 years before the internet bust, the dot-com bubble burst. So I was 2 years into my career trying to compete for jobs with people that had 10 years of experience and mortgages and little kids. And the tech economy was far worse. We hear a lot of news and numbers today about the tech economy. Oh, it's terrible. It was nothing like it was in 2000, 2001, because
Hmm.
now at least some of these companies are making a profit. Everybody who had paper profits in 2000, 2001, there was a whole lot of companies not making any money. So it wasn't like they were trimming, 5% to stay, get the books right. It was like, we have no work and we had no money and there's no more money and now we're closing or we're
Hmm.
ramping down by like 80 or 90%. So I had to figure out for myself how to stand out in a job search and how to network with people when we didn't have dice and all this stuff. You had to call people on your cell phone that charged you minutes. There was no
Right.
texting. There was no
Or
LinkedIn
your
or
long distance phone calls.
oh yeah, the long distance phone calls, those were a treat too. So that was the age that we had paper resume. We were just starting to email resumes sometimes,
Mhm.
just starting to occasionally have spots to apply online, but a lot of the stuff was still paper. Very few people were taking online applications. You might email your resume to someone and say, I want to
Mhm.
talk to you about like what are options here. So I had to figure out how to stand out. And I, of course, shared that with my friends because I have a teacher's heart, even if I didn't want to be in a classroom. And then a few years later, during the Great Recession, I was helping people again. And I was a leader in a professional organization that had been recently founded in Kansas City for IT business analysts. And that's got all kinds of range to that field. Like you can either be very technical, almost like a coder, you can be more like a technical writer, you could be a little bit of an analyst, a little bit of a project manager. And I remember doing we had a resume review fundraiser for the chapter, and we did like hiring panels, and I hired people too, so I knew what that was like. And so over time, I was just helping people in that way. And I started right around the time my husband died, either right before or right after, starting to have conversations with people like, you don't just want any job. You want to figure out what is the right job for you.
Niching down. Yeah.
Yeah. And at this time, I wasn't taking any money for coaching. I was just helping my friends and helping people
Mhm.
in the organization. And in about 2014, I took my first client. Two clients within the same month, actually, who both came to me and said, I want you to help me and I want to pay you. And I was like, I can get money for this? I'll take your money. So I was making good money in a day job, but I helped both of them try to figure out career paths that would make them happy because I consider it existential at this point. There's a lot of people that are afraid to go look for a new job. If you're laid off, it doesn't feel like there's an option. There's a lot of people that are laid off and looking for work right now in tech, which is still the sector I serve. But a lot of people are afraid to make a move from a job that they're miserable in.
The
They're
beast
afraid
I
of, oh,
know.
if the next job is worse, or what if I can't find one, or what if they won't pay me this? And I decided, I had a light bulb moment several years back that I was no longer afraid of that. I was afraid of wasting my life.
Yes. Now, was that after your husband passed?
That was after my husband died
Yeah.
that I got to that. And I really, really had that dialed in and started saying it out loud after a cousin of mine died.
Yeah.
She'd been miserable at work for years, and she actually developed alcoholism. She was a functional alcoholic working at home for years. So, like, nobody really knew that the Tervis had Tito's in it as often as it had water in it.
Yep.
And so I thought a lot. I started thinking about the concept of a last job.
Hmm.
Like, is the job last job my cousin Carol had before she died was not good for her. It wasn't good for her in terms of work she was doing. It wasn't good for she was paid okay, but she was working at home all the time because they had closed her office. But she was an extrovert. And
Oh,
so
okay.
she's a person that would have done better in an office. She, like all these different things that just were not right for her last major job she had
Hmm.
before, they closed that division, she got laid off. And then I think she worked a couple little jobs in between. I sort of lost track. But yeah, like is the work that you're doing, would you be happy to know that that was the last job you were ever going to have?
Yeah, I don't think people think about that
They don't.
because you think
They never.
about like, I want my life to be meaningful. I want my life
Yeah.
to be fulfilling. I want to help people, or maybe I want to build cool
Yeah.
shit or all these things.
Yeah.
But I've never thought of it in that way. Like, if this is
Is
my last
this for
job, is
you?
this
Yes.
amazing for me?
Is this good for you? And
Yeah.
sometimes that can look a lot of different ways. For some people, like, man, I want to cure cancer. I'm going to do all this. I'm going to climb. I'm going to be the best, whatever kind of surgeon or doctor or whatever. I'm going hard after that. That's fine. If you are proud of yourself because you are doing work that you love, pursuing
Mhm.
something meaningful, that is fine. But if you are doing work that you like really well for assholes, or in an environment where you have so much going on that you can't spend the time that you want with your family or on your hobbies or whatever, like that's not okay.
No, that's the equivalent of someone staying stuck in a
Shitty marriage.
warehouse job
Well, some people
forever.
love working in the warehouse,
They
but
do, but there's a lot of people that don't, but they do it
yeah,
because they make decent money and they
yeah,
get weekends off and they
yeah,
can leave work at work
yeah.
until work creeps into their subconscious and they're dreaming about it and they're drinking about it and they're
Yes.
doing all the
Oh
things
my
to
God.
avoid it.
I love that. Like, that's some truth bomb right there. So, yeah, for sure. So, I have, I spent, another 10 years in corporate America. I had a few different jobs along the way. Like, I had one company get bought. I got laid off once. I left to take a break for a little while, just because I'd never had more than like 10 contiguous days off of work in over a decade. I did
Mhm.
all that, but the whole time I was building up to what I'm doing now without necessarily realizing I was building up to doing what I'm doing now.
And what
So
are you doing now? Tell me.
now
I hope it's helping people with their resumes and finding jobs.
good news. That's what I do. So I have
Well, I
my
just saw your face when you were talking about it,
thank
and I'm
you.
like, that was really good. Like, and things I wouldn't think about,
Oh yeah,
as far as those.
this is what I'm working on right now. And so basically my company, which is just Diana Coaching and Consulting, because when you don't know what to name your company, you name it after yourself.
Right?
I help mostly mid-career leaders in tech. So people that are either like super smart senior developers, product managers, that kind of person. Maybe they don't have people reporting to them, or there are people that have a team reporting to them, sometimes up into the VP level. I don't hang out with like the boardroom C-suite folks very often, but I help them with career clarity. So figuring
Mhm.
out what you want to do next, whether that's to go change your career to something different, whether it's to figure out how to finally put the foot on the gas to get promoted or get transferred in a company that you like. And then also I work with people on the job searches if that's what they need. I've been doing a lot of work on that in 2024.
Oh, I
And
bet.
then I do some executive coaching too. So for leaders that are just trying to figure out how to dial in, make their teams better, make their own leadership better, I work with people on that. That's kind of my three lanes. So one of my proudest people that I've worked with is a guy that was dubbed the future GM of the US business unit of his company like over 2 years ago because they knew when the retirement date for the current GM was going to be. And he came to me and said, we don't have a big training department. We don't have coaches on staff at our company. So I worked with him for 2 years to try to prepare him mentally for that role. And it was really interesting because I kind of didn't know what I was doing. And he knew that. I'd known him since college. So,
Yeah.
there was trust there. But he thought he needed to know subject matter. And what he really needed to know is how to think differently about your role whenever you're going to have 25 people reporting to you and you used to have one junior sales rep reporting to you.
You need mindset matter.
Um, so yeah, there was a lot of mindset stuff. There was a lot of preparing because the job was going to be more demanding. We
Right.
uncovered the fact that he had depression, so he started seeing a therapist, uncovered the fact that he had some health issues like severe allergies and low T, stuff like that, that was impacting his productivity. And
Right.
so you got to get that in order before you take over 25 people.
It's gonna
So
wear the shit
that was,
out of you.
yeah, that was a really rewarding and it's been really rewarding work. And I've done some shorter engagements where I help people like that, but I enjoy like having even if someone only works with me for a few sessions for a job search, like to me, they're my client forever.
Yeah.
And always, that's how I always feel like I have this collection of hundreds of clients over the years. But I just want people to have their work and their life work together. And I want them to enjoy it. Over the course of time, I developed what I call the four cornerstones of an aligned career.
Hmm.
So it's basically, is your work right? Like, are you doing work that uses skills you like? You can find yourself in flow sometimes. It's like challenging enough, but not so hard that you're set up to fail, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
You have minimal suck tasks. Like every job has some stuff that sucks. but it's as low as possible. And then there's the right leader. You know, we all hear the stats that the main reasons people leave jobs is because either their boss sucks or they're not given an opportunity to grow. There's
Mm-hmm.
no growth path. So, right leadership is the next pillar, and that relates both to your direct boss and the strategic direction of your company. Like the people that I work with, sometimes that's the same because maybe they report to someone in the C-suite. But if you are working at a company that is a sinking ship because they're not keeping up with the times or the technology, they don't have a good business strategy, that kind of thing, then it's a problem. You know, I don't think very many people would argue that like X is the best place to work these days because it's chaotic since Elon Musk took it over. Some people probably still like it, but it's chaotic and it's not necessarily clear what the business strategy is for that. And then the next one is environment, which is all the things that make your work and your life work together. So that can be everything from is you the flexibility, you know, how many days do you have to go to the office? How big is your commute? Are you being paid enough? Are you being paid fairly for the market? Can you feed the kids? Can you can you have the flexibility to go to Johnny's soccer game on Thursday night when they're playing for the championship if that's important to you? All of that kind of stuff is under right environment. And then the last is culture, which a lot of people confuse with environment because they think culture is like pizza parties, and culture is actually values and action. So, what are the your values? How do they compare to the stated values of the company? Is there enough overlap on that Venn diagram for you? And oh, by the way, are the values that are on the website actually in place day to
Right.
day at the office, in policy, in how people treat each other, etc. So those are the things that I work on. There's a lot of job search coaches and career coaches out there that if you go troll on LinkedIn where there's a million career coaches like me posting, you know, stuff all the time, some of the people will be bragging about how they got Mary a $50,000 raise in 90 days using their job search strategy and negotiation strategies, and that's cool. I've had people get the job making a shit ton more money in 90 days, but that's not what most people are coming to me for. They're coming to me because they're kind of in the middle of their career, and a lot of times they have kids or other hobbies, you know. Maybe you don't have kids, but you have dreamed of running an Ironman, and the time to do that is in your 30s and 40s. It's not in your 60s. So, yeah, that's kind of what I've been doing with people. So, I'm no bullshit, very direct. I'm encouraging and direct at the same time. I'm not very nice. I'm very kind. Those two things are different. And I do a lot of one-on-one coaching. Sometimes I do free or paid workshops. I recently released a new job search essentials digital course at a very reasonable price designed to help people that can't afford a coach or just need some help getting their head wrapped around this job search thing after a layoff, or if they just want to try to get ready to look for one in January. So I'm dipping my toes into that as well.
I
So,
love it.
yeah, yeah.
I love all the job search stuff because if you don't like your fucking job, like,
Oh
what are
my
you
God.
doing? What are you
Yeah.
doing?
You know, one of the most interesting things people often ask, like, what's the hardest part of your job, especially during a recession or, you
Mhm.
know, the job market feels weird in a certain sector. They'll say, what's the hardest part? Is it, you know, is it AI? You know, is it that 500 people apply for every job? And those things are hard. They are not the hardest part of my job. The hardest part of my job is getting people to admit that they want what they want.
Right. Oh, I think that's, yes. A lot of people,
It's,
I think, know what they don't want, but they
they
don't
know
know
what
what
they
they do
don't want
want.
to start, but nobody ever had truly, well, not nobody. It's very difficult to find a truly fulfilling job that fits in with your life the way you need it to fit in without having clarity about it. You might
Right.
accidentally get lucky. I know a couple people that are like, yeah, I was just looking because my boss was a jackass and I saw this opening, and it turned out they landed somewhere really well. So that was mostly done based on what they don't want, but it's very hard if you haven't articulated what you do want to
Absolutely.
really land well. So yeah, that's kind of what I spend a lot of time working with people. Some people know what they want, but they're afraid to say it because they
Right.
don't think it's achievable, or they think someone will think they shouldn't do that. Well, fuck should. Like, stop shoulding all over your life. It's kind of how I feel about it. Don't should on your career, don't should on your life, don't should on your business. Like, I
Right.
hate the word should and I hate the word just most of the time. Sometimes it's okay, but people use them to diminish and gaslight themselves or others, and that's just not cool. So, yeah. And then other people have been so much serving everybody else's interests that they have no idea what they want.
Yeah.
No clue. If
I
that
yes.
45-year-old mother with two kids has, a lot of them have no damn clue what they want.
They don't. I feel like a lot of people, like especially women that have had grief, substantial
Yes.
grief,
Yes. Because
they
you go
have
into survival
af
mode.
afterwards, it is along the lines of you just go into numbness
Hmm.
and you don't even know. Like I'm literally coming out of numbness from my granddaughter's death. And it's,
Your granddaughter, you
it's
said?
my granddaughter. I lost a daughter and a granddaughter.
Oh, shit.
And I thought I was doing well. And then all of a sudden,
You're not.
because it's business as normal, business as usual. You're back into it. You're processing. I do mindset all the time. But all of a sudden, these last probably month or so, a couple months, I've been just everything is more vibrant. Everything is more clear. I know exactly where I'm heading. I know exactly what I'm
Love
doing.
that.
And I didn't have that before. I didn't have that before. Like, so my daughter passed in 16, and then my granddaughter passed in 21.
Okay.
And so when my granddaughter passed, it felt like version 2.0. Like I'm back right back into this. And I had done a lot of work between 16 and 21. A
Yeah.
lot of work, a lot of mindset work. But I wasn't ready to step into the grief field.
Yeah.
And then in 2022, I published my first book and I started that process. Um,
How did I miss you have a book?
I don't know. And then, and so it's just, and those things were all great. They were all fun. They all helped me process my grief in different ways, right? Doing all the things. But it wasn't until just lately when I decided I hired another mindset coach.
Okay.
And it's almost like given the permission to release the grief and you don't have to carry it with you anymore. Like you can love your people and it hurts like fucking hell when they're gone, when you lose them.
Yeah.
Um, but it's still a choice as to how you grieve, when you
Yeah,
grieve,
like how
how you
you're,
move forward.
I look at it as, how are you going to move through life?
Yes.
Because that hits different than people will talk about moving on or moving forward, and a lot of those,
Yeah, and
they
that's not
sound
it.
really they sound really cliche.
They
And
are.
one of the things I'm really strong at as a coach is kind of like flipping something 90 degrees so that someone can look at a concept in a new way to either understand it better, or because I've just identified their own bullshit. That's another thing that I'm
Yes.
pretty good at. Like,
And that can be, I mean, but it's just interesting. So talking about like people don't know what they want. And for the longest time, I just floated. It's almost like I just floated
yeah,
because I knew the direction I wanted to head, but I wasn't concrete in any of the
yeah,
things.
yeah,
But now it's like I'm like, boom, I know
yeah,
exactly where I'm headed. I know exactly who I want to take on as clients. I know
yeah.
exactly how I can help them. Exactly, all these things. It's just, I think time, if
I
that makes
think
sense.
you have to, I have a coach that been part of this work community for 5 years, and we're at the point now that it's like, yeah, you're my coach. You're also like my brother that we squabble with. It's like that.
Right?
We've become quite close friends, as well as he helps me in my business. And he has a really great statement that he makes a lot. I don't know if he first said it or if it's a quote stolen from somebody else, but he says that creativity can only happen in the margins,
Mm-hmm.
which I think, when I first heard that, I was only a few months out of corporate and I had to take a few months to detox because I was overworked at my last corporate role. There was a lot of bullshit that happened that I'm not even going to go into here, but it took 2.5 people to replace me, to
Yeah.
give you some context. So I needed to decompress, and it was survival decompression. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to enjoy taking this time off. It was like, no, I have to take this time off.
The
And then
mental.
eventually it became a little bit more optional. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when I started, working and stuff again because I like to eat and live indoors. But he hit me with that whenever my work culture was still being over busy and 7 days a week and like all the things. So
Mm-hmm.
it made a really big difference to me. And I think about that a lot because sometimes I think that like you may have only been able to find the focus because you let yourself drift, but it's such a delicate balancing act.
It
I
is.
think I think there's sometimes you drift when you're numb, which
Mm-hmm.
is probably okay up to a point if you can be,
Right.
pretty functional as an adult. Sometimes you drift because it's the margin that you need to kind of look inward or to explore other stuff. But that's the margin kind of
Okay.
drifting where then there's space for you to listen for it to come to you. I sound super woo-woo right now. I'm not really
I love
woo.
it. I'm big in the woo-woo
I'm
world
not,
because
I call myself woo adjacent. People are like, what does that mean? And I say, well, I have some crystals on my desk, but I don't know what they're for. I definitely don't recharge them at the full moon. So,
oh,
look, I have stuff.
I love it. I have my few
This is
crystals right here
something
either
that's
right
not
here as
simple.
well.
What'd you say?
I have my few crystals right here as well. I
Nice.
don't know exactly what they're for either. This
Wow.
one, this one here is very special. It's a tiny little beautiful little crystal.
I love it.
I don't know what it is. Um, and I found it walking in my driveway towards my mailbox one day. One day it wasn't there, and the next day it was there. And I'm like, okay, you are meant for me. We're gonna put you right up in
Very
here.
busy. I have smooth ones. I have two that are smooth. And this little purple one that I bought at a crystal shop I went to with my friend Kelly, because she's very into it. And
Yeah,
she's like, you should get something. And I'm like,
they call you. It's like they
well,
call
she
to you
said
and you're
it.
like, I want this
I said,
one.
what should I get? And she's like, I can't tell you that. She looked at the crystal.
Exactly.
That's a dumb question. And so there's all this stuff, and it was this really nice shop, like like in Brentwood, Tennessee, or something. Like I don't know the exact town, but because suburbs of Nashville, though. And there are like beautiful giant geodes, like these amethyst geodes that you need two men to stick in the back of a truck to get it back to your house, that kind of thing. And this was like $5 in a little basket. And I'm like, I like the purple smooth one. I want that. So I mess with it a lot,
Yeah.
especially when I'm on the calls where someone is like making me nervous. So some people have,
Worry stones, a lot of times, those smooth ones are
yeah,
called.
I don't know that I would call this a worry stone, but like when I'm trying to hold space for someone that's very vulnerable and they're kind of chaotic in their vulnerability, I have to stay steady so that they are allowed to be. We cannot both be chaotic.
Correct. No.
Um, so yeah, it helps to have a little something to put my hands on. My desk is pretty great though. I have a lot of fun stuff on my desk. So
I have to say, I have had such a freaking blast chatting with you.
I'm a good
Um,
podcast guest. Like
you are. If you need Diana on your podcast, reach out to her. Hint, hint.
yes,
She's
for
great.
sure.
She's fascinating.
Yes.
Um,
And I've had a good time with you. There's a lot of people that just not good interviewers.
no,
They
no.
just aren't. So I like when I run across somebody that knows how to let the person tell. And there's also a lot of people that are shitty guests. Like,
Right.
I just published my book, so I would like to talk about the 5 talking points that my book marketing coach told me that I should talk about on 100 podcasts before. Like, I'm
Yes.
sure I'll do that at some point. That's fine, but I was kind of looking
Not
forward
on
to
this one.
today.
Yeah. I've not had anybody talking like that on this podcast, which is great. I love it.
Yeah.
Because I like to hear the stories of the grief and how they've made it through it or around it or with it
If I
or
had to dial
having
in
it.
how I did it, I would say it's messy. And the only reason I did it is because I decided to.
Yes. I
And I
love that.
didn't just decide to make it. I decided to make it awesome as possible.
Right. You decided to not just survive. You decided
Correct.
to be happy while you're
Yeah.
surviving.
And
Huh.
what's interesting is a lot of people would think, oh, what are the amazing things that you've done since then? And I actually live a fairly quiet life. Like sometimes I feel like I'm the most boring person ever on paper. I'm very interesting on a in a conversation, but on paper I don't look super interesting. And some of that's like I found out a couple of years ago that I have Hashimoto's and PCOS and like a pituitary tumor. Like so I've had health conditions that have made me a lot of fatigue, all that kind of stuff. In fact, like I spent a lot of time gaslighting myself, like, what the fuck is wrong with me? But then I'm like, oh, there's actual reasons why. I'm not just a lazy piece of crap. So, I went through stuff like that. It hasn't always been smooth.
Yes.
I hit the point in 2020 where I wasn't sure I was going to get out of 2020. And
Mm,
that's when I finally went back to therapy again and found the best possible person ever, you know. um that's when I really started to make some breakthroughs on some things and understand myself better, and recognize trauma from when I was a kid because I didn't have any like major abuse or parents
right.
divorced when I'm little or anything like that, but I had a lot of feeling invalidated.
Hmm.
So and I had been telling myself these stories for decades about how the fact that this happened when I was a kid made me a resilient person now. No, that made me a hyper independent person now, which is not an awesome character trait.
Called bypassing.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff about it,
We
but
do it, same thing. It's like I tell everyone you don't get out of childhood without trauma. It doesn't
no,
matter what it is. You're gonna have trauma,
you're gonna have
things that
something.
you're gonna have to deal with,
Yeah,
overcome, manage, whatever your terminology is. You're not gonna get out of childhood without something to work on because hint, hint, we're not perfect.
right,
And our parents weren't perfect.
right,
Our people around us weren't perfect.
right. Most people are doing the best they can.
They are 100%.
They
I
might
agree with
have a
that.
weird ass idea about that, what that looks like. Sometimes you might go,
I mean, you can totally do better. I totally get that.
"Mm, think about that one again." But yeah, most regular old people are trying to do better.
Yeah.
Um, so that's what I've been trying to do the whole time. But I have curated a really good group of people in my life. Some are close friends, some are like just on the edges. But when I started working in this online creator coaching, writing, content, whatever the hell this world is that I'm in, and it sounds like you're doing some too, on top of your other creative like products that you're doing. I got very lucky because I fell in with some people who were highly ethical and they knew highly ethical people to work with.
Yeah. That's
So
good.
I never really got the shaft. Like, has every single vendor or, person I had a coaching call with or done a project with, has every single one been like knocked it out of the park? No. But I've not had my money taken by anybody. I have not been told things that are feel gross and like not how I want to treat clients or work my business. So I've been incredibly lucky with that.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, all right, we're gonna close this out.
Okay.
tell everyone listening where they can find you again. Um, if they want to work with you or follow you, support you, whatever that looks like.
So, the best place to start is probably my website,
Okay.
dianaalt.com, DIANAALT. One N in Diana, like the dead princess. And I have my social handles and all that stuff there. So you can find, I spend the most time on LinkedIn at this point.
Okay.
So that's another good place to connect with me too. And then if you're a person that actually wants to start taking charge of your career and your job search, you can go to Job Search Essentials if you're interested in my digital course that kind of teaches you the most important stuff so you don't waste as much time in your job search, kind of built on the 80/20 rule. And then also, if you want to talk about coaching services, you can learn about that on my website and book a free intro call to talk about how we can work together. So
Oh, that's
that's the
beautiful.
ways. Yeah, that's the ways.
I love it. Thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. I appreciate all the insight. I appreciate the very wonderful conversation. Um, and I loved it. It
Good.
was perfect
Well,
for what I needed for the day anyway.
I'm
So
glad
even if nobody else got anything out of it, I did.
we had fun.
I did.
It's a good
Huh.
use of time today. So
All right. I'll see everyone in the next episode. And thank you again, Miss Diana, for being on the podcast. I appreciate it so
thank
much.
you.
Thank you so much for listening to this special episode of Release. All the links plus a few extras are posted in the show notes below. And if you think someone you know could benefit by listening to this episode, please share it with them. And as always, keep going, keep being, keep doing. You are amazing.